Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how we can code clustered design studies that include a pre-test and a post-test. So just to review real quickly, a clustered design study means that it's not the students who are randomized into different groups, it's going to be either the teachers or the classrooms. So there are a couple studies that I know already in our collection of studies that do use this design. A lot of times I feel like you see it with extremely young interventions. So I have here an article by Clark et al. That looks at kindergarten programs because it's sort of just generally helpful for kindergartners to learn more math. Or I know Jitendra does some stuff up in middle school. And then Botke does some stuff as well. And it's sort of when you're looking at having the teacher implement, and what ends up happening is, if you think about it, since all of those students are within the same classroom or being taught by the same teacher, they're no longer independent. That teacher has an effect on the intervention itself. Even if a researcher is coming in and implementing the intervention, the fact that they're all sort of grouped together means that we need to take that into consideration. So let's look here at this article by Clark et al. You can see I've already put in the study name, the study ID. This is going to be treatment 1 versus control, and we're going to look at the TEMA, or the Test of Early Mathematics. And I wanted to show you first off some ways that you can sort of check to make sure that this is a clustered design study or that they are randomized by the teacher. So you can see here it says randomized block design. That's usually a key. Or if they talk about the number of classrooms, here it specifically says utilized a randomized block design with 64 classrooms randomly assigned within schools to treatment or control. So thinking about it, if my classrooms are what is being assigned, that means my students aren't independent. So I need to think about how I can capture that impact of the teachers. Okay. So the nice thing is it's pretty straightforward to collect this sort of data. We just have to be careful about some of the math we might have to do. And I wanted to pull this one in particular because I feel like it's a good example of what can happen when you're looking at early intervention articles. So anything that looks at kindergarten specifically, or sometimes first grade, we need to be mindful of the fact that at this point, a lot of times they'll give the intervention to all the students because it might not be super clear yet who has a disability status or not. So a lot of times they'll just give it to everyone just to sort of be proactive. So what that means is, for example, in this study, the demographics table that I'm scrolling down to lumps together students at risk for math disabilities or math difficulties, as well as students who are not at risk. So this one we had to kind of dig into the article a little bit more. We couldn't just use the table itself. So I'm going to pause here. And I want to highlight, when I go into the participant section, I can see that we're going to have 64 classrooms total. And that's something we're going to have to think about when we're collecting this data. And we have a total of a little over 1,300 students. But what I really need to know is the number of students who are at risk. So you can see I highlighted a couple things here. And I will be honest, this article I had to read a couple times over to make sure that I was capturing the precise information that I wanted. So at first I was looking for, well, maybe they say at risk are students with an IEP. But as I kept reading, I actually found more specific information. Now, I do want to highlight this information here, which is really important. This sample size by teachers shows us how many classrooms there are in, this is the treatment group, and the control group. This is really, really important when we go to our coding sheet. So we're going to collect what's called M. We're just going to call it M. Just kind of chose that letter to represent. And this is the number of clusters in the treatment group. And then we have another one over here for number of clusters in the control group. And what this means is the number of classrooms, for example, or the number of, if it's by individual teachers, the number of teachers. So I can put here, for my treatment, I have 34 classrooms, or I have 34 clusters of students. And for the control, I have 30 clusters. And you know what I can see here? This is a typo. And I'll make sure to change this on the other one too. That needs to be control, or yeah, the control M. Okay, so what I'm really looking for is I need to also figure out the pre-test, post-test means, all that good stuff. But I also need to figure out how many students are in each classroom. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to keep looking for this information. And initially I'm going to go to the results table because that's usually in a typical article where I would find this information. Now I'll give you a heads up, in this article it's a little bit different, but if this was a typical article, you could see T1 is the pre-test, T2 is the post-test that's described earlier, and it has the sample size for T1 and T2. So on my first pass in this article, I thought this was all the students at risk, so I went ahead and I calculated the number of students per classroom, but as I kept reading, I figured out this wasn't correct. I can't use these numbers. This is the sample size for all of the students, including students not at risk. So I have to keep looking. And this is why sometimes it helps to sort of skim an article the first time through before you start coding for effect sizes. Or if you do the demographics data first, you will sort of figure out that they talk more about the students at risk down here at the bottom. And so that's why we kind of want you to code for the effect size last. Okay, so I see here effects for children at risk for math difficulties. So this provides me a lot of my great information in terms of means and standard deviation. So I'm going to put that information in first while I'm still looking for the number of students per cluster, per group. So I can see the treatment mean post-test. They tell me here, at risk, began the year, so that's my pre-test. At post-test on the TEMA, the treatment students had a mean of 28.6. 28.6, and their pre-test is going to be, we said that ELM began with 14, oh wait, so that's in control, 14.1 in ELM classrooms. So that's my treatment pre-test mean. Let's say 14.1. And then this is where I'm looking for the number of students per group. I don't have that yet, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in the control data that I do have. So the control mean of the post-test in control, let's see, post-test, the control students had 26.9. And let's see, you know what, sorry, this one I'm finding all sorts of typos. I'm glad I'm going through and making this video. And then for the pre-test, their score was 14.6. Okay, so now I need to find how many students are in these groups or in these classrooms. So I had to keep scrolling down, and I finally found down here a description of how many at-risk students are inside each group. So you can see in the control condition, there are 342 students. So if there's 342 students who are at risk, and I know there's 30 groups of the control, I can do the math and figure out that there is approximately 11.4 at-risk students per classroom. Let me double check my math real fast, because I originally wanted to go, I was going to go to 2 decimal places, but that actually is just perfectly 11.4. So in this case, we are going to put the students per group for the post-test and the pre-test as the same, because we sort of had to figure out this math here. They don't differentiate between the number in the pre-test, the number in the post-test. They just sort of tell us as a group, this is how many students scored at risk, so we had to figure out ourselves the average number of at-risk students per classroom for the control. And this is for the treatment group, 313 students, and we know they're in 34 different classrooms, so we have 9.21 on average at-risk students per treatment group. So I know that was a little bit confusing. Most of your studies that include older students, you would just be able to go to the table, the results table, like we normally do. This one was a little wonky because the table itself included at-risk and non-at-risk students, and we're particularly interested in only the at-risk students. So that's why we kind of had to do a little digging and to figure out some of this math on our own. So I'm going to double check, and I have my means, I have the number of clusters, I have the number of students per cluster, and this is the last thing that we're going to look for. And if we thought the pre-test post-test correlation was rare, the row or ICC, I can put it up here, is like super rare. I don't think I've ever seen this in a math article. Sometimes they come up in reading articles, but I really don't think I've ever seen an ICC in math interventions. And the ICC, what that stands for, it is the intra-cluster correlation coefficient. So it's looking at the impact of having those clustered groups. And I'm just going to tell you now, it's so hard to find. So sometimes it might come up under correlation. In this case, when I look, you can see that they do have something here that sort of piques my interest. However, once I actually start reading it, it talks about the intra-class correlation. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually provide the number that we need. So what I recommend doing is look for correlation. You can look for intra-class. Sometimes it's described as the ICC. We can double check that, but they don't have it. So for this one, if you can find it, you are the best ever. But if it's not out there, if it's not in your article, that's okay. There's actually guidelines that we can use if you cannot find row. So it's okay. You know what? I'll look for row too, just to double check. So there we go. Yeah, I wanted to make sure because the fact that they include the title got me really excited when I was reading through this, but they just don't have the number for us, and you'll find that sometimes. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You will catch a couple of these articles as you are coding group designs.